I'm going to show you how I would rank these first 6 Kreator albums from their 1985 Endless Pain debut at the back there, all the way through to 1992's Renewal. And then I want to hear how you would rank them. Hello there, you great big ripping corpse. I'm Jason Arnott. You might remember me working on Kerrang a long time ago, and I still write for all manner of metal magazines as well as being an author these days. In case you didn't know, you're watching my new metal channel, Possessed by Metal. So if you haven't subscribed, then I would love you to. For the purposes of this video, I'm using these reissued albums, which come in the incredible Under the Guillotine box set, which I have made an in-depth unboxing video about. So if you haven't seen that yet, then I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one. Okay, in about 15 seconds, I'm going to show you the album that I consider to be in the number 6 place. But first, let me preface that by saying that as far as I'm concerned, I'm ranking these 6 Kreator albums from least brilliant to most brilliant. I'm a huge Kreator fan, and I love this early period. I love what they're doing these days as well. You know, Gods of Violence and Phantom Antichrist have been great albums. Different, obviously, more melodic than the early days, but still with lots to offer, to say the least. Okay, so what do I consider to be the least brilliant of the first 6 Kreator albums? It's Coma of Souls, poor old Coma of Souls, but it's just got so much competition in those early Noise Records years. I think Coma of Souls, I do tend to think of it as Extreme Aggression Part 2 to a certain extent, even though that's not really fair. It is a bit dirtier in sound and possibly a bit more intense and thrashy. You know, I still like the album, as I said, but what really condemns Coma of Souls to be in place number 6 in this list is that I can't remember any of the tracks apart from People of the Lie. And to be honest, I've never been crazy about People of the Lie. There's something about it that's just a bit too clean and sort of chorusy. I don't know. I'm supposed to be a writer. I should be able to explain myself a bit better than this, shouldn't I? Anyway, yeah, I just don't find this a very memorable Kreator album. I'm just looking at some of the track titles on there. When the Sun Burns Red. No, can't remember how that goes. World Beyond. No. Terror Zone. No, there aren't any songs on here that I can remember. It's weird though, because when I'm listening to the album, I'm enjoying myself because it's a Kreator album. Of course I'm enjoying it, but none of these songs are running through my head in the same way that lots of other Kreator songs do. Okay, so that's Coma of Souls at number 6. I must admit that my choice of the number 5 spot might bring out the pitchforks and the flaming torches in some quarters of Kreator fandom, but you know, that's fine. Let's talk about it in comments. I want to hear your order, what your ranking would be on this list. Sorry, but Extreme Aggression is at number 5 for me, and again, I like it. I will happily listen to it and I will enjoy it. Admittedly, I think part of how I feel about Extreme Aggression does go back to the day when it came out, and you know, I'd been crazy about the first 3 albums, and then Extreme Aggression came along and it sounded so clean. After what had come before, it sounded so clean and kind of bright and so different. And tracks like Some Pain Will Last, I just hated the first time I heard them. I don't mind them at all now because they kind of fit into the overall picture of Kreator, and you know, Some Pain Will Last is a good song. And it's interesting, that's probably one of the earliest examples of the kind of melody that Kreator would write now. Yeah, and the title track's great, Extreme Aggression is great. I really like Love Us or Hate Us, and Bringer of Torture is obviously very good. But on the whole, yeah, it's not really the kind of Kreator that I want most of all. You see, when this album came out in 1989, I think it really served as what you might call a gateway thrash album for so many people. I think this album, because it gained a lot of attention on MTV with the video for Betrayer and whatnot going out on Headbangers Ball, I think a lot of people got into thrash through this album. And that's great. Obviously, you know, this is a very valid and important album in that sense. I think it was a gateway album, actually, in the same way as Sodom's Agent Orange was, because Agent Orange came out that year too. I think it was the year of gateway thrash and thrash becoming more popular. And, you know, that's not a bad thing. I'm not one of these elitist people who wants thrash to stay in the dark. But all I'm saying is that on my particular list, Extreme Aggression isn't really up there. Number 4 in this list is Renewal. Now, as we know, this was quite a departure for Kreator. They brought in an industrial sound and really changed things about. I mean, you know, Miller Petrosa's voice sounded so so different, kind of hoarse and kind of barking as opposed to sounding demonic as he had before. When this album came out, I was really happy with it. I was really liking it, perhaps because I drifted away from the band a little bit with Extreme Aggression and Coma of Souls, and so this album kind of pulled me back in, actually, even though it wasn't really a thrash album at all. I mean, it's got some kind of thrash-style riffs in it, but they're against a very different backdrop. I also have good memories of this album because I interviewed Millet on the renewal tour for Kerrang magazine. I went to like Hamburg or Berlin or somewhere like that when they were on the tour. And maybe I'll put the audio of that interview on this channel at some point if I can dig out that tape. Let me know if you'd like me to do that. Yeah, I think this album has a lot going for it. I think that 0 to 1 and Europe After the Rain in particular are classic Kreator songs. You know, they should be on best of albums and everything. And also the title track is great. You know, that's a great riff and is memorable. And Winter Martyrium as well is really good. There's a lot of good stuff on this album. I even like Karmic Wheel, which is a bit weird seeing as it's just generally quite psychedelic, but the songs are really strong on this album. I know Millet says that they were smoking too much at the time, but I think they were pretty much on the money when it came to the songs, and the songs have really interesting, weird structures as well. The one thing I would say about Renewal is I think it works in spite of the production. I don't think the production is all that good. You know, the guitars could have been more prominent and a bit clearer, which is a shame, although they can be really big sometimes, as on 0 to None. That song is great with the great big guitars. But yeah, this album was recorded at Morrisound Studios in Florida, the home of death metal. A bit of an odd choice perhaps when you're trying to do something different like this, but still, you know, it sounds good, and it's certainly good enough, in my opinion, to make the number 4 spot. So what on earth is at number 3, you ask? Well, I'll show you. I did struggle with this decision a little bit, and I'm still not 100% sure of it, but this is my opinion this week. Let's put it like that. Yes, good old Endless Pain. You know, I mean, I love Endless Pain. Obviously, I love it because it's, you know, at number 3 in the band's first 6 albums. And this is their debut album from 1985. It's got one of my favourite Kreator covers. I just love the cover. I love the colours of the cover. Kind of looks like the front of a Fighting Fantasy game book, doesn't it? Let's face it. And it's an incredibly raw and kind of reckless debut album. And, you know, the band have spoken about how they weren't ready to record it, and the producer allegedly just kind of rushed them through it and was too busy smoking at the time. And so you can kind of hear that. It's a real shame. I think if ever there was a candidate for a Kreator album to be recorded by the current lineup, I think it should be this one. I'd love to hear them re-record it. I think it'd be interesting. But of course, there's a real special magic about this album that you could never replace. It's so kind of brutal and nasty and, you know, recorded by teenagers, clearly, literally recorded by teenagers. And the songs aren't the most memorable songs that you'll ever hear from Kreator, but they're also just so much fun. And from the moment Millet's vocals come in on Total Death, the second track, you know that this band means business. I really like the way that the first 3 Kreator albums have Millet and Ventor, the drummer Ventor, exchanging vocal duties. I think that's a really unusual, it's quite an unusual approach for a thrash band of the 80s, isn't it? Not many other bands did that. Yeah, Endless Pain is loads of fun. It's a thrash fest, and of course I should mention that it's got Flag of Hate. I mean, the re-recorded version of Flag of Hate is a lot better, but nevertheless Flag of Hate was on this debut album, and it's a classic Kreator song to this day. So when I show you number 2, you will by default know what number 1 is. So what's it to be? Number 2 is, yeah, it's Terrible Certainty. And I was really happy with this album when it came along after Pleasure to Kill. I mean, it sounds very different, but it's intense in its own way, and I think it gets a lot of value, this album, from the really live approach that they took in the studio. I think that works pretty well. I think the guitars could have been a bit crunchier and maybe a bit bigger, but nevertheless the energy is very much there, and it's a pretty frantic album right from the start with Blind Faith, Storming with Menace, Terrible Certainty. As the World Burns is more of a mid-paced chugger, which is nice. Toxic Trace is a classic. Love Toxic Trace. Also No Escape. One of Us is a great thrasher, isn't it? And then you end with Behind the Mirror, which weirdly I've never liked Behind the Mirror as much as many of the other tracks. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, I like it. I suppose I just don't quite get why it was the single. But nevertheless, what an album. Great cover. Love the cover. Obviously, I talked more about the covers and all that kind of visual stuff in my unboxing video that I did of the Under the Guillotine box set. But yeah, this is more about the songs and the audio, and Terrible Certainty is great. So let's have a look at number 1. I think you know what it is by now. Hands down, one of the greatest thrash metal albums ever. I mean, you know, if you ask me on a certain day, I would say it is the greatest thrash album ever. But then I'd change my mind another day or another week. Nevertheless, it's just wonderful. I mean, the cover is gorgeous. Just love this cover so much. I love everything about this album. There is nothing I don't love about it, I don't think, really. It starts with Ripping Corpse. I mean, I know it starts with Choir of the Damned, the classic thrash metal Calm Before the Storm, Choir of the Damned, that sounds all angelic and lovely, and then Ripping Corpse rips in. Ripping Corpse is an incredible song. They're all great songs. I mean, let's talk about the main ones, because otherwise I'll probably do a separate video that goes through this album track by track, or maybe I'll rank the tracks. Let's really drill down and rank it all. But let's talk about the most amazing tracks. And if I'm honest, they're probably all on side one. Yeah, you got Ripping Corpse, an incredible speed fest, absolutely love it. Pleasure to Kill, the title track, is just an absolute face melter, isn't it? What an amazing song that is. And then you have Riot of Violence, which is kind of a really sort of it's a really interesting one. That's got some really weird sections in it, and it's more mid-paced, but also very intense. And yeah. And the side two is full of bangers as well, absolutely. Especially Carrion. I really love some of the riffs in Carrion. But yeah, this album is just so unbridled. It's kind of unfiltered, undistilled Kreator, isn't it? I'm not saying that what followed was filtered down. I'm saying that this is unfiltered. This feels like pure Kreator. And it's incredible, really, what a progression they made between Endless Pain and this album. Yeah, I think that's quite weird, how they managed to evolve so fast. Number 1, Pleasure to Kill. Now, please get down in comments, and I would love to hear. Obviously, you can tell me what you thought of my list, but more than anything, I would like to see your list. Rank these albums in order, and let's see how many people leave their rankings. And maybe, if enough people do that, I'll do another video in which I announce the results of this vote. So get down there and cast yours. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Other videos on the screen for you to watch if you like, and I would love you to. If you haven't subscribed to this, my new metal channel, then I would love you to do that too, and maybe hit the like button. Oh, you know, all that stuff that people usually want you to do. Thank you so much, and until next time, metal.